I want to get the language so right that everybody here will cry out, yes, I'm black, I'm proud of it, I'm black and beautiful.
During summer, the sun doesn't go down until super late, and I would get really, really dark skin. And while now I appreciate my dark skin and love who I am and how God made me, that wasn't always the case because people would talk about it. They'd talk about how dark I got during the summer, and it became like this really focal point where I became self-conscious. Back in high school, there was this guy in my class, a Dominican brother, and he had really, really dark skin. And for some whatever reason, everyone called him Darkness. I didn't actually even know what his first name is because everyone called him that. And I didn't really see it as problematic back then. It'd be interesting if I could find this guy and ask him how he feels about that now, or whether he still calls himself that, or if people do. But that was kind of problematic. My name is James. Welcome to This Beautiful Crazy Life. This is a channel where we explore politics, religion, theology, and everything in between from a Christian lens. And today I want to talk about a subject that a lot of people don't like talking about: race. I know, ooh, scary, race. Ooh, did you just subscribe? Did you not know I talked about things like that? That means you didn't look through my playlist of all my amazing award-winning videos that I have that addresses very hard topics, but we talk about everything here. And what I want to talk about is this idea of colorism and internalized racism, because I've experienced this and it's really detrimental. And I think it's something that needs to be addressed. Even though we live in an age where a lot of things about racism is talked about structural racism, historical racism, individual racism, internal racism isn't talked about very often. People throughout Asia get their skin lightened or get their eyes to look more like white European eyes in Asia, And right now there's been this really cool thing happening in the Black community and an indigenous community where we're going back to how we traditionally look and not to try to abide by European standards. And if you think that we are a culture where all body types, like racial wise, are accepted, I think it's a little more complex than that. While you do see people like Michael B. Jordan, who is just like, a god among men, right? Where people just like seem to gravitate towards this man. A lot of this stuff is still there that like affects the way we view certain racial groups. I mean, there's actually like studies on racial preferences, and Asian men and Black women are at the bottom of that list. Now, hold up here. Some of you might be saying, well, that doesn't make someone racist. And I actually agree to a certain extent. I do think that we can have preferences. Like, you might just naturally be attracted to people with darker skin. And I don't think that means you're some colonizer, as I see like leftist people say, who have a fetish. For whatever reason, you might just be attracted to Black skin and dark skinned people. And on the other hand, you might be someone who just prefers lighter skinned people. And it doesn't mean like that you want to move up on the racial scale because you have all this internalized racism. No, it just means that you might just prefer that. And that's really up to the individual to decide and look at themselves to see, well, why do I prefer that? Which I think is important because in our culture, for the longest time, the standard of beauty was European looking people. And part of that's because we live in a culture where most people are white, so that's to be expected. But it doesn't mean it's good. And it should be addressed because this can have a harmful impact on children, like it did on me. And if you don't believe that this is still a thing, I want you to watch this clip here.
Oh, it's just perfect.
Natasha's curves are in all the right places.
The 34-year-old from Los Angeles is a size 6, has a 28-inch waist, and stands 5 feet 8 inches tall. Jean makers like Jennifer DeClark of the 7 for All Mankind brand says she uses Natasha's rear measurements as a secret weapon to creating the...
Okay, so I know you were expecting to see some random person's butt. My apologies, but it kind of just shows you the point that in a lot of ways, the standard is still European blonde women as what's the like epitome of beauty. This is from a few years ago. Check out this clip.
Interestingly enough, studies show that if you have between 104 degree or 108 degree nasal tip rotation, those are the ones that are considered the most beautiful, and hers is 106.
Somebody in here to measure our nasal tip rotation,
and then we know if we have the most beautiful noses.
But symmetry is what they say is a lot in the eye of beauty.
I really like how like the two black anchors there are just like, are we really doing this? Are we really doing this here? Now, I get it. A lot of times our preferences for skin color is mostly because of what we grew up around. A lot of times most people will marry and date someone within their same cultural racial group. And that's not necessarily bad or even necessarily good. It's just that I think if you grew up around nothing but black people or white people or Asian people, it's a comfort level and attraction can be learned. Now, some of us will just naturally be attracted to other people because they just are. Who knows what the science is behind that, even if they grew up in a very like insular community. While some of us who grew up in a more multicultural city like myself will just kind of find women and men of just different looks more attractive. I noticed here in Alaska we have a lot more interracial relationships than maybe somewhere like New York City or the state of Alabama. But you'll notice a lot of times people on the West Coast, at least from my experience, has been a little more diverse. If that's not been your experience, I'm sorry. I have a very limited personal experience, and that's something that I've just kind of seen for myself. About this idea of colorism and internal racism, I used to not like how dark I would get during the summer. So that's the reason I'm actually doing this outside, is because, I live in a state where during summer, the sun doesn't go down until super late. And I would get really, really dark skin. And while now I appreciate my dark skin and love who I am and how God made me, that wasn't always the case because people would talk about it. They'd talk about how dark I got during the summer, and it became like this really focal point where I became self-conscious. And while I was always someone who was like, fighting against these things, even in class, like we need to talk about colorism and we need to talk about internal racism because a lot of us have self-hate. Inside, I was actually suffering from a lot of that. A lot of people throughout Asia are brightening their skin to make it lighter, or where people are getting surgery on their eyes to make it more European looking. Like, colonization has had a huge effect on how the entire world sees beauty. And right now the beauty standard is in fact lighter skinned, more fair skinned people, which is funny because a lot of fair skinned people get themselves tanned. We live in a very wacky world here. But internal racism, where you don't like the way you look because of your skin color, the way your features look because it's not in the standard society, or because, people think that Asian people can't be beautiful. I've literally had one time a person say to my Asian friend, "You're really pretty for an Asian girl." My jaw dropped. I was like, who actually says this? Like, I know a lot of people are sick about this conversation about racism and all these things. It feels like so much. It feels like we're blaming people, or it's this and that. It's a big thing, but it actually does matter because it impacts people. Internal racism and colorism is demonic. If you're not a Christian, that language might sound really strange or weird, but it's an actual demonic force when you think about it, because it doesn't allow people to reflect how God made them. God's infinite wisdom, he thought people should be different colors for different areas, and he and he saw it as beautiful. Like, you don't see anywhere in the Bible where God condemns people for being darker or lighter skin. Like, that's not a thing. God doesn't do racism. There's Christians who do racism, but God doesn't do racism. And we have to address these things, because if we don't address the problem with colorism and internal racism and racism, it's not just like, dating is harder for people of certain races. Like, that's important, but we're literally not having the full impact of what it means to live in God's kingdom being reflected. We in the church should be the first people to be like, yeah, let's have conversations about this. Why do we see the way we see things? Why are certain people highlighted over different people because the way they look? This has to be addressed. And in Black churches, we should definitely be talking about this, because while we've progressed a lot, there's a lot of this sort of new Afrocentric view that's sort of popping up within a lot of Black circles. You hear a lot about Black is beautiful and Black is great, and that it's okay to be who you are. Guys, we're coming up against something where we weren't told that for centuries, and that people who looked like me weren't seen as people who were desirable for a long time. And so it just needs to be addressed. So I just thought this was something I just had in my mind, because the other day I was staring at the mirror and this thing happened. I was like, oh, I'm getting really dark. And I was like, wait, why do I even care? Where did that come from? I thought I dealt with this, but because of all these messaging and things I've been told as a kid where friends would be like, you're too dark, or girls would be like, you're too dark. Like, that stuff does impede on you. And even I, who's like 32 years old now, has to remind myself that my skin is beautiful the way it is, even with this terrible eczema I have. So anyway, guys, what do you think? What do you think about this? How can we do better? How can we show people that they're beautiful the way they are? How do we love people better as a church? How does the kingdom message and the gospel play into this? And if you think that God doesn't have anything to say about how he views his creation, we're probably reading the wrong Bible there.